agenda again.
Hello? Hello?
Hello. Yes, we can hear you, Conrad
Cool.
Lim.
What's up?
All right. So, oops. I've just posted the agenda today in the group chat, and
Okay.
yeah. So I'm gonna run through some ground rules because we're gonna start, and well, there's about 16 people here. Maybe we'll get more people joining in later. So, because
Yeah.
everyone starts muted, I appreciate if no one's talking, just keep your mic muted so we don't get any background noise. So all I can say is that there's a limited time to this meeting. Everyone's time is precious, so try to keep things succinct. And as well, let's. I know things can be rather heated, especially when we are talking about things we're passionate about. But please don't resort to personal attacks. Don't be difficult, or else we have to remove you from the chat. I mean, I guess that goes without saying, but no harm to repeat it. So what we'll do today is basically, I mean, the main reason for this community meeting today is basically to discuss on two really main things, which is the ongoing discussion as to whether to change the proof of work algorithm for Zcoin. We're currently using MTP for almost slightly less than a year. DGM34, who is help us do the minor stuff, he's here as well. And later on, we go on a bit as to the rationale of why we think MTP should change, but of course some people think that we should keep it as well. So I guess the first half of the meeting will be mainly discussing, we have a short little views from Henry Kwan from Epic Blockchain. Later I'll introduce him, and we talk a little bit about like the trade-offs of CPU, GPU, so ASICs. We did cover this a bit in the last meeting, but for the benefit of those who didn't really attend, we have a really quick overview of that. We have a really quick discussion of proof of stake versus proof of work. I don't want to spend too much time on this, mainly because if we are switching to proof of stake, it almost requires a complete architectural change, and even the distribution of our rewards probably has to change. We'll then probably talk about the kind of tree algorithms that we were kind of looking at if we are still pursuing ASIC resistor, which is ProgPOW, RandomX, more CPU focused, and MTP, which is what we're using. And I think Kristy recently had some very preliminary ideas of something like Prop MTP. And I think just recently, Ethereum just kind of announced that Ethereum will be adopting ProgPOW. And what does that mean for us? How does that affect us, if anything at all? Conrad, yeah, we'll talk a bit about like a proof of stake, proof of work, and yeah, we basically have a proof of work and masternode hybrid currently. But I guess the main thing is about what should the proof of work algorithm should be. And the second half of the talk, for those of you who can stay on, it's one of the really important things that we're discussing on is in September, around like mid-September, the block reward, basically the founders reward and the development reward totally stops. Currently, it's 8% to the founders. That I think that stopped. No one's asking for an extension of that, obviously, and 6% of the development reward will also stop. So currently there is a discussion on the forums as to maybe extending that for a certain period of time while we figure out a better way to do this. How much should that be? How long should it be? Should there be an allocation to like ZCS, the Zcoin crowdfunding system, or some sort of grant system? That's up for debate. And that's what we'll be doing for the second half. If we have time, we'll talk a little bit on the ZCS items and can give development updates. So before I begin, does anyone have anything they want to quickly bring up or insert into the agenda? We are targeting for this not to exceed 1.5 hours. And the reason why we're dealing with the proof of algorithm changes because it's pretty late for Kristy and Henry. Yeah. Okay, so I guess there's nothing. So I guess we'll progress with our agenda. So as I mentioned, we are considering a proof of work algorithm change. MTP is has some issues. Perhaps maybe to quickly begin with, DGM, are you available to speak? You have to unmute yourself if you want to.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So just very quickly, maybe you can give an overview of like our current algorithm, the pros and cons of each, and just like within the next like 2-3 minutes or so. Yeah.
Well, the current advantage of the algorithms is it's for the moment still FPGA or ASIC resistant. Its implementation is very original. It is backed by a scientific paper, and from the way it works, there is two steps. One step which is created a large scratch pad, which is used after that which is used to create to search for a solution The main disadvantage at the moment is the size of the proof of work, which is quite large. Although I think it is possible to reduce it a bit, and I think there could be some possibility here to improve it in that way without too much risk. The main reason for this big proof of work is for fast verification on the wallet, so the wallet don't have to go through the same procedure to verify the solution. It doesn't need the full scratch pad. It just need some of the solutions which are in the proof of work. And part of the proof of work is also used to make sure that this verification is consistent, and that's why it's a bit large.
It's actually, I think, very large, right? Do you know how much is like a proof of work for like Equihash? Is like 1 kilobyte, right? Is that something 1.5 kilobyte?
For Equihash, it was relatively small. It was only maybe 1 kilobyte.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
for
MTP is like 200, and then maybe we can reduce it to about 100, right? Is that what we're talking about?
if I look at the implementation in TetraCoin, it was possible to decrease the L factor by 4 basically. So, and that is possible to do that without hurting too much the security of the algorithm. That it would be easy to go for doing the same procedure to go to 5 GB per year of 50 kilobit.
All right. Yeah. All right. Cool. And then like, how about like the current, like between NVIDIA and AMD cards? It seems to be favoring NVIDIA more currently. Do you happen to know why? And
I
just
didn't really understand.
no,
The question.
because like currently MTP kind of favors NVIDIA cards, right? Much more than AMD cards. Would you agree with that?
Depends on the cards. If I look, for example, for the Vega, Vega does something like 3 megahash per second, and it's on par with high-end NVIDIA. So yeah, maybe the old model are a bit lagging behind, but
Okay. So, like, I mean, like, what would you consider a high-end NVIDIA, like a 1080 or 1080 Ti? Because I know the 1080 Ti does about 4.4 mega hash, right? Yeah.
The 1080, yes, between 3.5 for megahash. The 2080, I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. All right. So I think we just have an overview of what MTP is. Thank you very much, DJM. And I think we'll move on to Henry Kwan. So Henry Kwan, he is from Epic Blockchain, and basically Epic. Hello. Uh, yes, yeah. So just introducing you. So Henry has over like 30 years of experience in semiconductors and like technology startup companies. I think he previously worked as a vice president in ATI. And right now, like his recent contributions, like he was a speaker at GreenCon where he was talking about the difficulties in building a green ASIC, some of the technical considerations there. And he was also covering, I think he published a paper on what if Ethereum Classic moves to SHA-3, which I'm not sure if I think they're currently doing that as well. So Henry does have knowledge on ProgPOW, and he has a little bit of information on MTP. I think previously one of his tech guys did look into it, but I think he has more knowledge of ProgPOW. But perhaps Henry, I'll let you, talk about just very briefly, like CPU, GPU, ASICs, proof of stake versus proof of work. Just like a brief overview of the scenery, and basically what would it mean to perhaps design an ASIC or FPGA for ProgPOW, RandomX, or MTP, and just a brief overview since you're the expert in this area.
Sure. Thanks, Ruben. It's a pleasure to be here talking to everybody. As Ruben mentioned, I have experience actually in all of these developments. I was with ATI and we did the first graphics chips and they eventually turned into GPUs. Currently building ASICs for, blockchain technologies, and with AMD to building CPUs. So fundamentally, the way we view it is that they're all ASICs. Just it depends on how specific each product is towards its function. GPUs, CPUs are more generalized, and being generalized, you have to put in a lot more circuitry, and therefore they tend to run slower and are more inefficient in terms of doing an algorithm. I gave Ruben a slide on the evolution of Bitcoin technology and how that evolved. Typically, what you would do is most algorithms would start out, in my opinion, on a CPU, just generalized, everyone can support it. Cadena did that with their Blake technology. And, eventually you build the algorithm for GPUs. GPUs come over, start mining. They're probably 5 to 20 times faster than the CPU. FPGAs are purposable, and if you have the right bit streams and the right FPGA architecture, then they're another order of magnitude efficiency over a GPU, let's say 10 to 20 times faster. And of course, ASICs are hundreds of times faster. That all really depends on whether the functionality is core bound or memory bound. You'll see that FPGAs haven't penetrated a lot of the memory-bound algorithms because although FPGAs are flexible, they are by and large limited by their memory bandwidth. So if you look at FPGAs today, they're using primarily DDR4 memory. GPUs today are using GDDR6 memory. So the performance delta in memory, you're looking at probably somewhere in the neighborhood of, sorry, I gotta do mental math. You're probably looking at neighborhood of about 20 times faster in terms of memory performance. What Ruben has on the screen is something I pulled from the Bitcoin wiki, which shows the progression of performance in SHA-256 in the relative scales. you know, Bitcoin is not memory bound. It's basically core bound, so it's fairly adaptable to FPGAs. And, you know, the chart is a little bit misleading because the snapshots sometimes are frozen in whatever the time frame was. So the latest GPUs are probably another 10x faster than what's listed here. So you can expect to take the numbers of efficiency and say what would have been 2 million times faster than a CPU, you know, it may only be 200,000 times faster. But this gives you an idea of, you know, the performance rankings and how technology progresses over time. If you flip to the next page, the SHA-3 is another example of an algorithm which the Ethereum Classic community is looking at. And you can see this is a much more modern representation. SHA-3 is again core bound. So, you know, you can look at the performance numbers on an NVIDIA or an AMD. The AMD 570 would be like, you know, 300 mega hashes per second. And the 1070 would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 mega hashes per second. That's because NVIDIA has faster cores than an AMD in equivalent architecture, but AMD has faster memory access than NVIDIA for an equivalent architecture. So it's a little bit of give and take. The FPGAs are primarily performance limited by, you know, the number of logic blocks they have, and by the frequency they run. So you can see that comparing an FPGA to a GPU, again, you're looking at, you know, basically efficiency-wise, 15 to 20 times faster. And, you know, it really depends on the size of the FPGAs. FPGAs, you can see, are primarily significantly more expensive than GPUs, and they're not generally available in the mass market like a GPU. ASICs are specifically designed for the hashing functionality, and all these cores run in parallel. So you can see that, you know, comparing an ASIC running a SHA-3 to a GPU, you're 1,000 times more efficient. So that's really the benefit of general purpose hardware. You can see cost-wise, the ASIC's a lot more cost-effective. That's because, again, it's been designed for the purpose of pure hashing. It doesn't have the memory or all the extra loading of SerDes cores, memory blocks, and other things that an FPGA has. So it kind of goes from, you know, do you want to hire a general contractor to build a house, or do you want to hire a developer to build a condo? And that's really the decision point.
Okay, and of course, this kind of calculation changes depending on the algorithm, right? And certain aspects of the algorithm can affect like the relatively efficiency gains between the different hardware classes, and you know, also like, you know, if you use more memory, you know, how that affects the cost of producing an ASIC. How does it affect like FPGA? Because a lot of the leading sort of memory, a lot of the leading algorithms that we're looking at today, especially in the context of Zcoin, has been more like, you know, towards like ASIC resistance. And of course, there's this whole argument of whether ASIC resistance is something that we should be looking at. I mean, I don't think there's anything that's ASIC proof. You can always build an ASIC for anything. But, you know, there are certain aspects that may reduce the efficiency or may make an ASIC less appealing to build, right? You know.
Sure. If you want to, actually, that's a good point. Can you flip to the memory architecture slide?
That's this one? Yep.
This one, yeah. So I present this at GreenCon. And really you know, in a memory-bound architecture like ETHash, somewhat like a ProgPOW, and you know, things like Cuckoo 31 and 32, which is using Grin, memory is one of the biggest limitations in performance. So, you know, if you use external memory as on the bottom, where we've got GDDR6, is anyone using an ASIC using external architecture, memory will not be any faster than a GPU. It may be more efficient because you don't have all the baggage of extra hardware that's not needed for the processing of the algorithm. You can move to faster memories like HBM2, but fundamentally you're only going to be 1.5 times faster than a GPU, running standard GDR6. And on the top of that, you've got specialized architectures like memory array. Lindsay put out a product, or is working on a product, which is decentralized memory, taking one big memory pool, dividing it amongst 64 different ASICs, and then basically having all the ASICs daisy chained together. That's a clever architecture, but has some unique disadvantages, and the board is more complicated. And if any one of the memories dies, the entire rendering functionality is done. And then you've got basically the highly integrated memories. So we're looking at the new generation of products, mainly in AI space, but also what we did for our Cuckoo 31 product for Grin is a large pool of embedded SRAM. And embedded SRAM will run 1,000 times faster than external memory. So you see Cerberus, GraphiCore, all these new products that are replacing GPUs with large amounts of integrated memory. They're looking at, most of these products are using 256 megabytes of internal SRAM, and the product that we designed for Grin was 512 megabytes of memory. So, the way that we get fast performance is we don't have to cross the bus. It's more power efficient, and because you're running internally, and we're 1,000 times faster, you can run the algorithm over and over again instead of doing it one pass.
So are you saying that right now, like in the memory bound algorithms, you would be able to design an ASIC for it because you can have this type of ASIC plus large SRAM type of architectures? And
That's correct.
Does that also bring up costs significantly of building such an ASIC? And at the same time, like you're talking about, okay, like 502 megabytes, is there any sort of like limits with current technology that, like, if I put like a requirement of 6 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes, how does that affect things?
Well, the way that, so let me go on record as saying ASIC resistance is futile. You expect me to say that because I'm an ASIC guy,
Yes,
but I'm also a GPU guy as well. So I kind of walk the line in the middle. Basically, we're of the belief that anything that worsens technology or progress is a bad thing. We don't, in the real world, we don't limit medicine because we believe that it's too expensive or that, hasn't been fully tested. If people are sick, then you should have medicine to cure people. Our belief is that if technology makes things better, if it's faster, if it's more efficient, then you should go ahead and use it. And fundamentally, we believe that ASICs secure the network, and GPUs and FPGAs are, transitional, opportunistic miners, even though they've been the backbone of some of the networks like Ethash or like Ethereum. But to answer your question is yes, everything's doable. It's this question of time and money, and is it worth it? I can also mention that RandomX is crackable too, but with falling rewards on RandomX, you probably wouldn't build an ASIC for RandomX.
Right. I think one of the things that we were like really, concerned about, especially, was the availability of this, ASICs or FPGAs, right? I mean, of course, when you take a look at the spectrum of kind of hardware devices that we can build, everyone can just go into a store and buy a GPU, right, or CPU or GPU. And then you have FPGAs, which they have export restrictions, there are limits, and they're also highly technical to operate. I mean, like even I probably would need a lot of help to run an FPGA. And then of course ASICs are quite easy to operate, but like they're not that easy to, like, I mean, I haven't been Bitcoin mining for a while. I mean, I think you can still buy Bitcoin ASICs relatively easily, but if you take a look at like altcoin ASICs, right? That was kind of like, altcoin ASICs are really hard to get. Like you try to get a Zcash miner, you try to get a Litecoin miner, most of them are still like the first or maybe second generation, and they're all out of stock, right? So
Right.
obviously, when we are early in the cycle of the distribution of Zcoin, we want to make it accessible to as many people rather than ASIC manufacturers. And one of the things that we were really concerned about, because I know you're an ASIC manufacturer, is that like what are the economics, because effectively an ASIC manufacturer is selling machines to make money, right? Especially
Mhm.
those that only do one thing. I mean, maybe yours, you can do AI stuff, so even if you're not mining, there's some use to it, maybe, right? But
Right.
for stuff that's like designed just to mine stuff, they're effectively money making machines. So why would the ASIC manufacturer want to sell it outside when they could mine it themselves, right? And similarly, I mean, it makes sense when the company is still small. I'm trying to get a minimum quantity order of silicon, or I'm trying to like get cash flow so that I can expand my
Sure.
operations. But once I'm like the size of Bitmain or something, what is the incentive for me to continue selling these machines when I could be mining themselves? So I would appreciate, especially you're the contrarian from our view, but we want to hear
Sure.
your opinions on that.
Well, yeah, I actually answered a lot of these questions in the GreenCon conference. You should probably, I'll look for the link and publish it on the chat or send it to you later on. But fundamentally, if you look at, it's really the timing of cost and the burden of cost, right? So for GPUs, you're basically paying for memory. You're paying for a lot of extra costs you don't need. It's a general purpose product. You've got memory, you're paying Samsung or Micron probably half the cost of the board. I mean, you're paying for 3D functionality and whatnot that you don't need. So it's a very expensive part for for building network security. With ASICs, a large part of the fixed costs is upfront. To develop the ASIC, you have to go and perfect the algorithm. That takes, months and months of tuning. And then you've got the big upfront costs in terms of the semiconductor wafer mass. So the wafer mass can cost anywhere from $2 million for 28 nanometer wafer mass to $12 million for a 7 nanometer mass. So like you just and then you just basically say, how am I going to sell? And you divide the number of units you're going to sell across your fixed upfront cost. Now, for a big company, that's not a huge issue, but it makes sense. It makes sense for a big coin like Bitcoin, where the rewards are $7 billion, to put everything into the technology, keep tuning, testing, do multiple iterations, and chase the market. And you can sell a lot, and you can keep the product in mind for yourself because it's a big TAM. For the smaller TAMs, like Zcoin, like a Ethereum Classic, Zcash, Grin, it's probably not worthwhile to keep mining for yourself. If the rewards are only 50 to 100 million, you've got a much better chance of ROI and recoup your investment by selling the ASICs to third parties and not bearing the risks of the coin fluctuations. So I think you can see for smaller coins, they should be generally more available. And from a smaller ASIC manufacturers, it should be generally more available. I can tell you from my aspect, if I'm building a product for Grin, I can expect $50 million of sales on a Grin product. It's going to cost me $10 to $15 million to build the product. To get my ROI for self-mining, I have to build 3,000 units, and I have to mine for 6-7 months to get my ROI. I don't have that type of capital, and nor do I want the reputation of being, on the dark side. So, our mission at Epic is to make technology available to everybody, and have the market decide who's the best miner and how the commercial terms work. I also want to comment on one other point that you said, that GPUs are generally available. I would argue with you that they generally were not available. If you go back to 2017.
Oh yeah, it was like all sold out. Everyone was just like,
exactly. So, who got them all? the big commercial miners. It was not the home people. And I have another dark, dirty secret for you, which is a lot of GPU manufacturers kept those products for themselves and they were mining. So, you know, there's the folklore of what's good for the community. Then there's a myth of GPUs are good, and then there's the evil side of GPUs. I can tell you evil stories about GPUs all day long, but I'm not here
to separate, by the way, GPU manufacturer for the record from NVIDIA and AMD building the chip from, you know, the OEMs like a Gigabyte or like an ASICs or like, oh God, come on, there's MSI. It might just be good to clarify that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm referring to the customers of, you know, AMD, the direct customers, AMD and NVIDIA were, you know, rumored to be mining. And the shortages were, you know, I would say largely artificial. But
Okay.
I can tell you that at least 2 GPU manufacturers were mining their excess inventory at this point because all these products are written off now, right? They've got large memory pools, sweetheart deals are being cut. You know, that's somewhat due to market pressures and having to move inventory and trying to recoup their cost of investment.
Sure, I think Kristy definitely has a lot of opinions on this. Maybe I'll let Kristy weigh in a little bit on this. Yeah.
I can talk a little bit about it since I was directly involved in all those deals. So during the time when the P102-100 was created, I was employed by Genesis Mining at the time, and we set out to make a very impressive Ethereum mining farm that would be then sold out through hash rate rental contracts and available to the general public. And so obviously we dealt with a lot of OEMs at that time, quite a few. The OEM saw, and for clarification, an OEM is an original equipment manufacturer, and I think AMD uses the terminology ODM, original design manufacturer, but these are your brand names like a Gigabyte or an MSI or an ASICs or a, oh God, there's more, sorry, brain.
Tool,
but
Sapphire.
Yes, Sapphire. So they saw that they were kind of curious. They're like, hang on, these people are ordering all these GPUs. What are they doing with them? They're not gaming with them. They're not rendering. So during 2017 and 2018, people started getting really educated about the Ethereum mining and, you know, the gold rush that was happening. What ended up happening was, number one, the brokers during 2017 hyped up the amount of sales that could actually be made on Ethereum mining to the point where OEMs got incredibly greedy. So they went out to NVIDIA and AMD and said, hey, I have all these customers, you know, give me 200K chips, give me 300K chips. I can sell them all out this month. And what was happening was the brokers were just really talking to all the same groups. So there was only 1 or 2 clients. And the GPU OEMs got incredibly greedy and stock, and, you know, AMD and NVIDIA gave them allocation. And then it turned out they couldn't sell any of these chips or any of these products because there's really only 1 or 2 large-scale enterprise miners for a brand new coin when it comes out. You know, Ethereum in 2017, it only had a few large backers. 2017 was really where the GPU mining community began to rally around and grow a little more decentralized. And so all the GPU OEMs were sitting on this stock for, close to 9 months. They had nothing to do with it. And so a few of them had the brilliant idea of, well, why don't we just go start our own mining farm? And so what they would do is they'd spin up another entity of their own that wasn't affiliated with the main company. And then they would do a purchase agreement with, you know, their, with the OEM company and put those chips under their mining farm, and they build them out into the boards. And it was expensive, and they didn't always have the capital. There's still a ton of unused stock today, specifically around the 480 chips and around the GTX 1070 chips. A ton of unused stock because OEMs get really greedy. So NVIDIA and AMD rely on the OEMs to tell them what kind of supply they have. And that's how they figure out how many they're going to produce for the year, along with all their other stuff. And that's what happens with new and upcoming supply chains. It gets messy.
Sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
Kristy. One other thing there is that the GPU manufacturers got even more greedy during the hype days. You know that they also did an end run around their ODM customers. So they went to Genesis and others and started selling direct with the reference designs.
So only one person did, and that was because, only one of the manufacturers did. Part of this was because it was a custom-built product and it was getting tested. And then on the AMD side, the reason why they were selling direct was because it still went through, the component supplier. So you still actually had to purchase from the component supplier, but many of the miners wanted to make their own boards.
Yep.
So when you're building for these large scale farms, we're not actually building for mining. Like when we, if as Genesis Mining, you don't go and purchase 100,000 GPUs just because you want to mine with them. What you're doing is you're going to eventually mine, and then you want to have the flexibility if mining just disappears or it's regulated or it crashes, to pivot into another industry. That's kind of the backbone of the GPUs. And so a lot of times we wanted custom designs around the board. The other thing was when you're running it in immersion tanks, or when you're running it in custom devices that traditionally these boards are not designed for, you need something custom. So we were, part of the designs that I worked on, we wanted to choose our own VRM chips. We wanted to choose which memory was on the board. We wanted to have some custom changes to the board for heat reasons or voltage reasons. So a lot went into that. And yeah, it was, they've stopped doing that since. I mean, in 2017, I think both AMD and NVIDIA learned a lot of what not to do. That mistake is being repeated now in the FPGA industry, where Xilinx and Intel are slowly starting to learn, they can't trust the brokers, they can't trust these third parties anymore, and it's not good to sell direct because you get burned. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like getting a bit back to the topic is like, okay, let's assume like what would the ProgPOW ASIC look like, and what would the MTP ASIC look like, in terms of costs, how much would, like, I think right now we're worth maybe about $50 million as a market cap, and I think I'm not sure what's the current output of our coins. Like maybe you can hear from Henry first, like if, for example, with the chips that you were looking at, like the combination of ASIC and memory, would something like a 4 gigabyte memory preclude that, or is that like still really possible? And like how much would that cost, right? Yeah.
Well, a 4 gigabyte product's not possible until we get to something like a 3 nanometer product. I have that in the Grin slides where we plot how much of the die is useful. Beyond the technical, beyond how much the total size is, the problem with memory is that it relies heavily on yields. So if you have a bad bit, then if you got a lot of errors, the chip's basically not usable because they're basically invalid hashes. So theoretically, if you look at our example of a KUKA 231 product,
what's the memory requirement of that for the KUKA?
That was 512. Okay. So that was on the bare edge of manufacturability. That was in the 16 nanometer. In a 7, we can go to 1 gigabyte. But again, if you ask me, practically it's not manufacturable. That ASIC costs, by time yield and everything's done, is $200. Yeah, we were much faster than the GPU, but the risks of putting in production are pretty high. So, if you ask me, Ethereum is has huge rewards. I think 900 million or $1 billion the last time I looked. It's worth building an ASIC for. Could we do it? Probably. Could we sell enough to make a difference in the hash rate? Probably not. Right? You look at how many parts have to reduce to do that. So you say, 200. If you say basically just do simple math and say, each chip is $200, 200 or 1 billion divided by 200. That's how many ASICs I would have to build to get 50% of the network.
It's like
There's
it's
no way
possible, but you don't have that profitability to make it like economically feasible right now, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Now,
So,
so I just quickly want to move this because I know we've been spending a bit of time on this topic, but I guess one of the really key things that we're thinking about is that, for example, like Kristy, obviously, she's one of the creators of ProgPOW. I mean, she's not anti-ASIC, but of course, there are claims of what ProgPOW can do, right? And obviously, I think just from listening from you, yes, ProgPOW ASIC might be possible and definitely is possible. I don't think Kristy would argue against that, but maybe the efficiency gains aren't there, or would be like just too expensive for especially a smaller coin like us. There are two things that really concern us, which is one is how feasible is ProgPOW FPGA, because one of the claims of ProgPOW is that with because of its random element, the bit stream needs to be changed all the time, and it's not practical for an FPGA to be built for ProgPOW. That's one of the like really key things, because obviously FPGAs I think are one of the most like specialized and least distributed devices currently, at least. And the other thing is that now Ethereum seems to have committed to moving towards something like ProgPOW. Assuming that we take ProgPOW and change certain parameters, would an Ethereum ASIC or maybe a semi ASIC that can be like flexible enough to both mine Ethereum and then switch to Zcoin like that? That is something we would want to avoid, and that would kind of like shift our decision back to, okay, well, MTP is like obviously different enough that an ASIC would not be flexible enough to mine Ethereum and then switch to like a ProgPOW variant on Zcoin. So yeah, I appreciate your thoughts on that. Yeah. Maybe the FPGA question as to is ProgPOW really FPGA resistant because of the random element in it?
you can't do ProgPOW on FPGA. The memory is just too slow. So you remember I talked about the fact that using DDR4 memory, so that by and large is going to be, I think, 20 times slower than GDDR6. There are HBM variants of the FPGAs, but those FPGAs are $2,000. So you compare a commodity GDR6 product like Navi, the Radeon, what is it, 15700. That's $400 on the street, compared to an FPGA with HBM memory, which is $2,000.
Right. So, but I mean, right now, you, according to Kristy, you have already like HBM2 FPGAs.
Right.
Would that change things significantly? And I think one of the key things is that she was saying that you would need a new bit stream every a few minutes or so, and obviously that's not very practical for someone to program that. And would you agree with that? Because you need to recompile things with the FPGA every few minutes or so, right? That would seem to kill it in the water.
I think if the FPGA is big enough, you could probably program the bit streams so that they're the equivalent of fixed cores as opposed to fully randomized cores.
Okay. Kristy, do you want to say anything on that?
Yeah. So first, the tool chains of FPGAs. It takes quite a lot of time to build a bit stream. The nature of ProgPOW's framework is that not only can your random math change, but if you so choose, the whole architecture can change as well. So you can pre-build a lot of cores, but you're going to have enough space to store at least a majority of these possible streams, and it's completely random, what method KISS99 is going to generate, as well as should you choose to implement it, what different parameters are going to be adapted and changed. The tool chains for FPGAs right now are horrible. So the tool chain is what you're using when you send code to the when you do your design on the FPGA. Your tool chain is what helps you turn that into a bit stream. It's the compilation process. It's god awful on Xilinx. It's a little better on Intel. It's still not possible to build a bit stream even with a very nice computer without a 30 to 40 minute wait time, which is why I said that the X in building a bit stream every X is very important. You can definitely put ProgPOW on an FPGA if you were only changing the algorithm, every 60 days. There's absolutely nothing that says you can't build, a ProgPOW FPGA for that. HBM2 FPGAs have just come out, mind you. So while they're coming out, they're very new, like 3 days new. HBM2 is becoming a lot cheaper on the market as well. So just to expand on that. And to give sort of a point of reference, in the HFT and the quant fund world, FPGAs, usually you're trying to change your stream every 30 to 40 minutes. And that's the kind of work that Citadel Securities does. So when someone says, they can build an a bit stream for ProgPOW, they're saying that they can do a better job than Citadel Securities can do with, timing all of their FPGA hardware. So there's a lot of claims there. I know quite a lot of people in the industry claim they've got ProgPOW running on an FPGA, though I've yet to see that proven to me after 2 years.
Have you seen, actually, Kristy, ETH hash running properly on an FPGA?
No, I have not.
Okay.
I have never seen it running properly. I've seen many claims of magical 1.5 gigahash.
Yep.
There's something about that number. Sometimes it's 2.1. SQRL, or Squirrels Research, the hardware manufacturer that just teamed up with Intel for HBM2 FPGA, states they're launching with Ethereum and Equihash. But again, I've not seen that with my own eyes. The BCU 1525, Core Scientific actually has the IP to this. It is an at hash running on it, but it's only at 20 mega hash. It's terrible. So you're not making any money on that.
Okay, so a very quick question. So now it seems to be confirmed. Maybe Kristy can tell me, because I just saw the news today that Ethereum has confirmed that ProgPOW will be used for Ethereum, which is awesome, right? But it also means that, well, what does that mean for if Zcoin adopts ProgPOW? Wouldn't that kind of yes, obviously we're competing for the same hardware class, but is it different enough that, let's say, if there's some sort of ASIC or FPGA or whatever that's developed for Ethereum, because there's a huge incentive to do so, if we change the parameters for Zcoin, how would that look? Would we be protected against those type of devices?
You're still
yeah. Go on.
I was going to just say you're still competing for the same hardware base no matter what.
Yep.
And that won't change if you stay on MTP, or if you adopt ProgPOW, or if you go with any other GPU-based algorithm. You still have to, compete for the user base. So in crypto, you've got a very limited user base, and anytime you launch a new coin, you're competing for that user base. Even with ASICs, you're trying to compete for the people that are already in cryptocurrency and that might have the necessary skills to mine and might be interested in mining or supporting this chain. And that's really important to understand. This industry is still brand new. It's still infantile.
Let's say if there's a ProgPOW ASIC, would it be flexible? Can you design an ASIC that would be flexible enough to mine a ProgPOW Ethereum and then ProgPOW Zcoin, with certain change parameters?
So a proper ProgPOW ASIC, and Henry can weigh in after this,
Mhm.
really should resemble a GPU. There's going to be some things you remove from the basic GPU. So, you'd remove the graphics pipeline. You'd remove a lot of the codecs for encoding video and audio decoding and encoding. But it really should be resembling an overall GPU architecture. And if someone does that, of course, it's going to be able to mine any variation of ProgPOW because it's mimicking, a GPU.
Yeah, I would agree.
What are your thoughts?
I would agree 100% with that, Kristy. The reason it doesn't make economic sense is because it's just like a GPU. If we have to buy external memory, then fundamentally all you're getting is a cheaper ASIC for a specialized application, but it still has all the cost burden of a GPU, which is the external memory. The challenge would be if you can fit it into a small memory model, then it would be very much a product that would work on ASICs. But,
Currently, F hash, if not for that, memory vulnerability, would it be, economic to build a FAC? Because I remember there was like a trick that
Yes.
you could use.
No one's using that trick at scale right now. No one's using the DAG exploit right now. No one. It's published, but the Bitmain's ASIC does not use that. So the E3 is just a bunch of really cheap DDR3 that Bitmain had at the time, and they were sitting on it, and they're like, well, what can we do with it? Because ethash fundamentally doesn't use much compute. The compute's kind of just a little bit of glue. The whole point of an ethash ASIC is get as much cheap memory bandwidth as possible and cram it into a very small space. That's the goal of it. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically the E3 miner it's just a very cheap product, right? You look at the 18 ASICs in there, they use DDR3 memory. Each ASIC with its memory is about a third of an RX 470 in terms of performance. So
and it didn't cost that much to develop either. It was literally one dude designed it. I'm very familiar with it. It was being designed at the time in 2017 when I was in China. So,
what's the efficiency gain, if any, on that current FASIC?
It was about 2x, if I remember correctly. When it was 1800. No, sorry, it was 180 mega hashes at 600 watts, if I remember correctly.
And what was the price efficiency? So everyone has that different efficiency metric. As miners, we care about hash per dollar per watt. So from what I remember, the E3 was being sold to the US at 800, but you could buy it for about 400 to 500 within China.
Okay.
So when you think about it, it was actually perfectly timed because it got timed with the GPU shortage.
And what?
But then if you go, go ahead.
No, go. Just finish.
I was just going to say, if you go up a generation, so that was like slapped together in 2017. You go up a generation, and then you have InnoSilicon's A2 memory. So it's important to understand that InnoSilicon, their base business is production of memory PHY and memory controllers. ASICs just happened to be a very fun side hobby they got into. And so they had access to quite a lot of memory. And so their A10 product, which is their Ethereum ASIC, was GDDR6 based. And we've confirmed that and publicly shared it. We confirmed that with the CTO of InnoSilicon. So that's G6 based, and that efficiency gain was 10x over a GPU. Now, Canaan's ASIC, the new one that's coming out, which I want to say it's V10. I'm not too sure of the model name they've publicly advertised as.
V2200.
V2200, okay. So it is HBM2 based, and it is a 15x efficiency gain over a GPU. Is that right, Henry?
Yes.
So you've got this progression of as memory architecture gets better, the efficiency gain is increasing. But again, it's because all you need to do is just use a ton of memory bandwidth. That's all ethash cares about.
How about MTP? Like you have some experience with MTP. Do you know how that compares?
I have a lot of experience, but I'll get in trouble for talking about it.
All right.
I can talk a little bit in open terms. So you know, MTP is requiring memory size as well as memory bandwidth, and a tiny bit of compute. But it's not as, it's actually very similar in terms of how you build an ASIC to some of the Equihash variations. And right now, MTP just doesn't justify an ASIC, period. There is just, it's because the market cap of the coin is so low. It's much more beneficial to go and build, you know, a dedicated FPGA miner for it.
Right.
But an ASIC would probably have, again, you'd try and get whatever the cheapest memory was. And HBM2 8GB right now is $100 for a stack. So I'd probably be using that with a really cheap core, ASIC core.
And I think because we're approaching the 1 hour mark, maybe you had some thoughts on how a prog MTP would look like. You know, I mean, the main thing is that not very concrete.
Yeah, not really using MTP itself, but it's more that, correct me if I'm wrong, but when MTP was designed, that memory size was specifically chosen as a rationale to limit, limit a lot of these low-end GPUs that could quickly be amassed at scale or on the second-hand market.
The idea was actually botnets, but then, I don't
anything
know
can be a botnet. Just like anything can be an ASIC, anything can be a botnet. If you control a server, you can technically, you know, if you control many servers, you know, at scale, that is technically a botnet. It can be GPUs, it can be CPUs, it can be whatever. But you would probably just change ProgPOW's architecture and have some of the MTP proofs to force a certain memory size as well as a certain memory bandwidth. But again, the more complexity you add, the more potential vulnerabilities there are, and the more messy it gets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to weigh in? Henry, anything that you want to?
Well, I would agree with Kristy, but you know, I would make the comment: you probably want to reduce the proof size and the size of the ledger as part of that transition.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, rather than just the pure security part of the network.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's actually the major reason why we want to move away from MTP, just because the shares for each share need 200 kilobytes. You know, it's just occupying a lot of space on the blockchain for no particular reason, and you know, it was just seemed like ProgPOW, was just like a better version of what we were trying to achieve. Yeah.
I think you need to ask yourselves as a community, why did you choose MTP? What was that defining reason?
It was supposed to be about egalitarian computing, right? I mean, that was what the paper was promising, that it was equality between CPU and GPUs, and if we had
so that's impossible. It's impossible to make. You can think of it in stages.
No, we know that now. It's just that, like, you know, we trusted like this, like academics, and you know, now we know that that's not possible. Especially when we were building MTP, you know, we were talking to TJM, and we were like, it doesn't look like we can get like the equality that we really wanted. And I think, as you mentioned, I think we all realized this. They made a lot of assumptions of hardware that just doesn't really reflect in reality. I mean, that's in a nutshell, right?
Yeah. In general, my experience has been cryptographers should never design anything for hardware, and hardware designers should never design anything for cryptography. That's been my general experience, because the worlds are too different. And, you know, in cryptography, your whole goal is to produce a form of a hash or a form of an algorithm that can be sped up, and you actually care about speeding up and making it faster. Whereas in the proof of work space, the real reason you go for proof of work is you want to make sure that the chain is expensive to attack. So you have that CapEx investment as well as an ongoing OpEx investment. You want to make sure enough energy is burned to prove that, you know, meaningful work was done. Those two worlds are, you know, polar opposites. And Howard Chu of Monero did a fantastic talk on a lot of the lessons he learned, because he came from the traditional world where you need to speed things up, and, you know, proof of work algorithms are the complete opposite. Slowness is better in the proof of work context, not necessarily in the validation context.
Right. Okay.
I would differ slightly and think that it's not energy that you want to burn. It's basically you want to make sure that that the work is sophisticated enough that the ASICs or whatever's doing the processing, you know, you don't find vulnerabilities that way. And I think this is a gap where cryptographers and the ASIC manufacturers need to talk to each other. I think that the VDF guys are on the right track where, you know, they're looking at different variations. They're talking to the hardware community and saying, you know, what are the vulnerabilities involved and how can we improve it? Okay. And VDF are
not vulnerabilities. We call them optimizations in mining.
Okay.
Well, MTP had a vulnerability, like a
yes,
time
it
memory
did.
trade-off. But yeah, okay. So you know we've already hit the 1 hour mark, and you know I do want to discuss other stuff. Thank you so much, Henry and Kristy, for giving your opinions and your insight on this. Is greatly appreciated. I mean, if you want to check out what like Epic Blockchain, it's epicblockchain.io. They build ASICs, so if you want to build an ASIC or something, do check it out. And I think Henry will be happy to sell you his stuff. But yeah, so I think so. Before we move on to the next topic, I mean, Henry, Kristy, you're welcome to stay, but of course, you know, if you have other things to do, don't feel obligated to just stay on. But the next thing, before we move on to the next topic, perhaps with still Kristy, Henry, and DJM here, does anyone from the community have any questions in particular that they want to bring it up, especially relating to the proof of work algorithm change? I'll wait for maybe half a minute. So Evan's question, you know, why do you choose Merkle? I think I'll let DJM answer that on chat. It's not really relevant to the current conversation right now. But does anyone have any questions? Okay, I guess there's no questions there. Just about pizza and how much it's going to cost and stuff like that. So thank you very much. Feel free to stay on. We'll be talking more about our block reward distribution now. That's an upcoming issue. So yeah. Right now, after this discussion, we haven't had like a clear decision of whether to go with ProgPOW, ProgMTP, or just stick with MTP or modify MTP. But you know, I want to have some time for this meeting to go out, get distributed, people watch it, and hopefully it will stimulate good discussions. And then we'll revisit it. We're not in an absolute hurry to change the algorithm, but it is something that we should really be thinking about in the future, especially with blockchain bloat and just the whole efficiency of the whole system. So now let's move on to the block reward discussion. So right now, with the current block distribution, like 56% of the block reward goes to miners, 30% goes to masternodes, 8% goes to founders, and 6% goes to the development reward. Now with the upcoming halving, basically all the rewards halve, and if nothing changes, the current code is set to be 70% miners and 30% master nodes. And what that means is that there's no more development reward. Well, the founders are definitely not asking for an extension, and neither would we agree to an extension. But we do want to consider whether the development the reward. And right now, just from the forum feedback and stuff, it seems that the most of the community are okay with a development reward. So, and there's generally been anything between 10 to 20% of the block reward. Now, just quick clarification: to maintain the same level of funding as we have currently, which is about 13,000 Zcoin, 13,000 Zcoin a month. We would need to have the block reward go up to 12%, from 6% to 12% because of the block reward halving. So, so first of all, how much should that reward be? Right? Should it be the same? Should it be less? Should it be more? I can say like right now, with 13,000 Zcoin, the price of about six, we just have enough ish to have like the current development team that we have, which is actually, I would say, kind of understaffed. I would like to hire more people, especially on the front end side or something like QA testing, which we don't have the budget for. I mean, we have 15 people on our payroll. And on top of that, we have to talk about PR companies, marketing companies, and all, things like that we still have to kind of think about as we are still like a relatively small coin. So yeah, so first of all, that's the first question. And for how long? I mean, of course, some people say like, we should just increase it for the next 4 years, renew the mandate for another 4 years. But personally, this is my personal opinion, is that we should maybe look at something more like a shorter term, like 2 years, while we try to figure out like, what's the best way to do governance, especially with the Zcoin crowdfunding system, to see how that is panning out, whether that can supplement the income and see how that progresses rather than centralizing. Because the good thing about a block reward is that it really aligns the incentives of the developers together with the coin. And yeah, so Kristy, you asked a question. So what that means is that as the developers, we're not getting a huge money up front. We get it as a trickle, and we are incentivized to keep this coin developing and improving to continue receiving this reward. And therefore a block reward, I think, is an excellent incentive, because if we stop working, we just like exit, scam, or whatever, the rest of our block reward means nothing. So yeah. So why not put the portion under the mining rewards for development? Yeah, I mean, that's what it currently is, which is 6% of the block reward, unless we want to do a Bitcoin Cash style where we're giving a lot of power to the pools and miners. It is currently designed to expire, but we are thinking of perhaps 12% or something like that. And I would like to hear from the community. Feel free to unmute yourselves. Just keep it short, and yeah. No one has any.
What are the issues? Why would people be against extending the dev fee?
I think the only reason why people are saying is that this is not the original agreement, and I would say a development fee is a centralization point, because it makes it like this development fee is going to this, right, and it's not as decentralized as something like Monero or Grin. I would argue that may not be as decentralized as we think it is, because like, for example, I know for a fact that Monero's crowdfunding system is very dependent on a few big whales that contribute regularly, and even for such a like $1 billion market cap project, they have also issues in getting like sustainable funding as well. Grin, for a very long time was having funding issues as well. And when they have funding issues, they had to basically rely on very big Bitcoin donations to keep them running, and I don't know how sustainable that is in the long run as well. But yeah.
From my perspective, the dev fee is a good thing. Grin is a perfect example of, a project that should have some, should have been moving faster, but they're always looking for money. So with the recent donations from some of the Bitcoin whales, it's finally gained some traction and able to move its technology direction ahead.
Yep. I mean, I totally agree on that. In a way, that also kind of makes it like beholden to a few big benefactors, and what does that mean for decentralization, right? And that's a big issue. I mean, like you talk about Bitcoin, a lot of the work's being funded by Blockstream and just a few companies, which may have some their own vested interests. So it is definitely a trade-off. So I would first want to hear, like, is anyone here in this particular chat against having any sort of development reward, and just say let's just go to zero. I would say that definitely a lot of the people on our team would not be able to continue. It's not a threat; it's just reality. Unless they can be funded through the ZCS. Everyone's really quiet. Pro Defi from Sinion. Def free or Defi? Comrade Measure. Okay. Yeah, fundamentally development's a centralized process. Okay. So one of the things, Comrade, is that at a 6% development fee with current prices, yeah, we basically, if the price doesn't change, I would have to fire half of our team. So to keep it the same, it has to be 12%. So yeah, 12% is the current thing. So one of the questions that we need to ask is, like, for example, we have the Zcoin crowdfunding system, right? And I don't know if having the centralized funding is at odds with the ZCS, because the people are like, oh, you're already getting a block reward. Why not? Why do we still need the ZCS? And the ZCS was kind of born. For those of you, I'll just type the link here. The CCS was kind of founded for two reasons, right? One of which is for like community projects, for outside funding that, like perhaps the core does not have brain space to kind of deal with, like, community meetings here and there, or like, side tasks. And it was a way to make sure that, like, even if you're outside the core team, you could find a way to fund things. Now I can say that the ZCS, a lot of the items there are still, the core team does support a lot of this stuff, but there may be other instances where we simply don't have the money. So I guess it's also a decentralization process to make sure that the core team does not just have full dictation of what we do. Yeah, so nefarious technology, you have to be careful with adding additional dev fees to coins. Look at the extremely bad rep BSV took from doing 21% dev fees. Prices will increase. Their way to do a percent on the market versus percent based on block reward. I don't really know how to implement a variable change based on fiat value unless we have some sort of weird oracle, which just seems to be
Smart
asking for
contracts
trouble.
and oracles.
Yes, which seems to be a problem, right? It's a centralization point as well, right?
I just like to take this chance to remind everyone who have any thoughts about the development fee or the halving to post their comments on the Zcoin forums where it will be more permanent.
Yep.
I have some thoughts about the development fees.
Oh, Diego, nice to meet you.
Hello, everybody.
So, just a quick introduction. Diego's from Monero.
I'm from Monero.
Yeah, he was one of the guys that started the Monero CCS, and he also helped us to port the Monero CCS to the ZCS. So he has very strong views about that, but it'd be good to listen to him. Note that he also calls the Zcoin scrubs, so take that into consideration. But yeah, go ahead, Diego.
No, I'm sorry. That was just a really flamboyant introduction of myself. I don't know what the context is, so by all means, please continue. I'm just here to listen.
Cool mic, bro.
Thank you. I got it from a one of those stores where people give away their old stuff. What are those called? Thrift stores. I got it from a thrift store for like $40. Believe it or not.
All right.
A Yeti microphone?
Sorry.
Is it a Yeti microphone? It looks very.
I mean, no, it's a Heil microphone. Heil.
Oh.
Yes. Ragnarok, I read the chat. I see you recommend mugging me. I wouldn't recommend it. I squat. You probably don't. So I don't know, man. A nerd against a jock is just not a thing to do, you know?
All right, let's stick to the topic. So, I mean, like, maybe Diego, maybe you could actually share a bit of how Monero CCS has been working. You know, like the challenges, the good stuff, and you know, you're really involved in this, so it'd be good to hear some of your experiences with it. And I always see you, like, you know, begging people to donate to the CCS. so yes, please do share some of your opinions and stuff.
So sure. So the CCS, formerly known as the FFS, the Forum Funding System, it's been going on pretty much since Monero's inception, and we've been surprised. There's been several times where it has its pros and cons, you know. In the height of 2017, when everyone was rich, everyone was like, oh yeah, I'll fund this. This is great. We'll fund everything. And then everything crashed. And people like, see, but now I can't afford my ramen noodles anymore, so I'm not going to be able to donate to these CCS proposals. But it has lasted a lot longer than I thought it would. For those who don't know, we do have 2 full-time researchers for the Monero Research Lab, Sarang and Saray. We have a half-time coder and another half-time coder. So we've got a few people that we renew their contracts on like a 3-month basis, a quarterly basis. And, you know, sometimes it gets a little scary with how long it takes to fund those. Sometimes there's a little bit of an over-reliance on whales where maybe, you know, it'll get funded halfway and then the rest of the 50% of 200 Monero gets funded all at once, which great. Yay for the whales. Very happy for them and that they exist and that they help us out. But the tragedy of the commons is real. It is a real thing, and mobilizing the community to donate can be hard. That said, it has done us well for the past, how long has Monero been alive? 6 years. So it's been around for like, I guess, 5-ish years. And there's been plenty of times where we're like, there's no way, like the last round of funding stuff was way too difficult. Maybe this time it's just not going to happen and we're going to have to look for alternative options. But that hasn't yet happened. And we're hoping we can keep up this scam going for a little while longer, but we'll have to see. So I'm really excited that Zcoin adopted this ZCS portion. I would have loved to see them go completely in that direction instead of kind of the extension that you guys are doing, but I understand people got to eat, and not everybody can be as pure and awesome as Monero. Concessions have to be made for the scrubs. I totally get it, but I'm excited about the work that you guys continue to put out, and I am happy that you guys did put up the ZCS. I wish you great luck with that as well. And maybe if you guys mobilize your community better than we mobilize ours in terms of donations, we can learn from you, and or vice versa.
So we can fund your stickers, right? So Rehrar
yes,
has a sticker
yes,
proposal.
yes, fund my stickers. I will make Zcoin stickers. For those of you who didn't see, this is the last I'll talk, then I'll shut up, I promise. I made Monero stickers for Telegram and Signal. Isabella, the Monero girl, just fun little cartoon stickers, 17 of them. I want to make some for Zcoin also. I have a ZCS proposal up there. You guys should comment on it. One of the biggest parts of engagement is commenting on these proposals. Go there and leave a comment. Yes, I like this. No, I don't like this. Can this be improved? Can we change the milestones? This really, really, really helps. Don't be one of those people that looks at it and doesn't do anything. It's not that hard. You can just leave an emoji if you want to, but please do comment. It makes a big deal.
Yes, definitely. I'll leave the link here again, to take a look at those at the idea stage. There's 3 of them right now. And then there's one that's, currently halfway through funding. There's a few in work in progress. We hope to use this more, especially for side tasks. But please, it would be nice to see more items up there, and more importantly, more feedback, so it doesn't seem like it's still the core team pushing it really hardly as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to Kristy's proposal. Hopefully we'll see that relatively soon. The proof of pizza stuff. Yeah. So okay, all right. Let me just quickly get back to the point. Is okay. So let's say we are agreeing, like, okay, 12%. That means we get the current funding. Parliament did mention, should we have, something like additional 4 or 5% that we can also use to fund stuff on the ZCS. But I don't know how I feel of that unless there's a separate like committee or so that kind of handles that portion of the funds, because then it kind of defeats the point of having a separate fund. How does everyone feel about that? I would really like to at least maintain 12%. 15% would be great, but that that means, does that leave anything for the ZCS and stuff like that? Yeah. No one have any opinions?
If I can make I know I promised I wouldn't talk, but if I can make some kind of suggestion, I would really like to see a balance out to the core team economically. So the cool thing about the ZCS is it does kind of decentralize the process, but it is still kind of stewarded and chaperoned by the core team in some sense.
Yes.
What I would love to see, and I don't know how difficult this would be set up in the timeline and stuff like that, but I would love to see some third entity enter this whole thing, whether it's a legal entity or an unofficial entity or a group of people that are known to be trusted or whatever, who, I mean, if you're already going to divvy up funds on the protocol level, maybe see about giving this entity, which has stated goals and a stated mission and trustworthy people that are known or whatever the case may be, that may get a small portion of funds. No, maybe nowhere near as much as the core team. Maybe it's 1 to 2% or whatever, but, and even if it cuts into the core a little bit, I mean, I don't know the exact percentages that you guys are talking, because what this does, money equals power. I mean, a lot of us don't like to think about this reality, but in our world, money equals power. And so if the protocol is divvying up money to only one group, this is giving one group a lot of power.
Exactly.
The ZCS is trying to decentralize this, but I would like to see from somewhere within the community, a group of people rise up and say, hey, we're willing to we will take the burden of being given free money, but maybe 1%, 2%, something like that, where they can mobilize these funds separately from the Zcoin core team. You don't need their permission for anything. You don't need to talk with them. Hey, is this good? You decide amongst yourselves. This is a real decentralization of power that is actually going to be helping. And, obviously what the community is comfortable with. Is there a way to rotate these people out?
How is that different than, let's say, something like what Zcash does, right? Like, you have the ECC, and then you have the foundation, then you have a bunch that's also for crowdfunding system. And as far as I know, the foundation and the ECC, I mean, the ECC used to have a lot of power, especially because they had all the developers and their researchers. But now, because the foundation has now clear funding, and they realize the centralization, they have also started to acquire their own cryptographers, their own programmers, to even develop an alternative implementation of Zcash on their thing, which I thought it was really interesting. But yet, a lot of people, like especially Monero guys, they see as, oh, this is horrible. This is a bastardization. We're funding Zuko's groceries and stuff like that. But how is this different, right? Like, let's say if we have a separate group of people, it is kind of similar, right? In the sense of like a second body of people to do these things.
And I think it's a bit of a unique opportunity for you guys too, because both of Zcash's entities that are receiving funds are legal entities. So if there is kind of a decentralized group of people that can receive funds either in a multi-sig address or something, and I understand there's going to be a lot of conversation that around this to get it to actually happen, but if some money was to go through a decentralized but trusted group for, and maybe even on the protocol level, it's only for 3 months or 6 months instead of 2 years, because these people have yet to be proven, unlike the Zcoin core team, right? There's
Right.
nothing that says it has to be a long time. Maybe it's just a few months to try it out, at which point maybe you guys extended or whatever the case may be. Like it's a unique opportunity to test what would happen if you gave protocol money to a decentralized group that is not bound by legality, I guess. So in theory, maybe these people just exit scam. Okay, maybe they just exit scam, and then the whole crypto space can learn this is not a great idea. Okay, but but maybe it'll be successful, and it could pave the way for something like Zcash, because also speaking of Zcash is also looking for like a third group besides the Zcash Foundation and ECC that hopefully they can kind of give resources to,
Grants,
and they
right,
can
to the
be
grant
kind of a
system.
tiebreaker thing, but they don't have one. So maybe, and they're so by the books that they probably wouldn't settle for anything less than a legal entity. But so there's no precedence for this in the whole entire cryptocurrency space, is all I'm saying. So there's maybe a unique opportunity here for somebody to, for some very individual that wants to get things done, is very passionate about Zcoin for whatever reason that might be. You guys decide to actually make one of these third-party things.
Yeah, this definitely seems the direction I want to go to, but I don't really know where would I find these people, right? I guess that's like some of our core community members, and then we'll see how that goes and how to move people in and out. I think that's a really interesting question and experiment there. Does anyone have any other thoughts on this, especially those that actually hold some Zcoin, not like Diego? I don't know if you sold off yours.
I still have mine, dude. I'm too lazy to move it, so.
Right. So, okay, so far looks like no one's against an extension. Seems like everyone's at least okay with the maintenance of a 12%, which keeps us at where we are, and that's kind of the same as what's happening on the forums as well. Of course, there are some thoughts, especially whether there should be a separate fund, which I'm actually for, that is managed independently from the core team, and maybe a core team member can be an observer or one of the signatories to make sure that it's not too easy to run off with. So yeah, Evanus, you had some questions. But how comes it's only me talking and Diego and Kristy and Henry? Everyone's so shy, even though we have decent participation here.
Yes, I am very shy.
Okay, everyone's voice shy. Is there any discussion about the proof of work and masternode ratio changing? There are some talks on that. Would be, what's your opinion on that, Sineon? I don't really want to rock the boat, but I still feel that masternodes have to be like more utilized to kind of talk about a greater reward to them. Oh yes, they are the most loyal, I would suppose, but at the same time it is a centralization issue. But yeah, we have this discussion going on the forums. A comrade major, although it's working right now, we don't know, because after halving there is a risk, because the Z node rewards also half. So currently, I think the returns are about like 15%. So 15% per annum. That kind of translates to that. And if after the halving, that would translate to maybe 7%, assuming the same number of Z nodes on the network. But who knows? Some people may liquidate, and it might remain the same. Remember, Z node rewards are a function of how many Z nodes are on the network. It's basically a fixed piece of the pie, and how many people share with it, and also the cost of actually hosting a Z node. which will increase as the blockchain gets bigger. Because right now you can't use a $5 thing. Vera did talk about, do you guys plan on the tail emission or no? Okay, so first of all, this is something that I actually like a tail emission, but I feel that every time I bring it up, I'm kind of shot down because people say it's like you have an unlimited supply, which I really don't agree on. I feel that we're kind of early to be talking about a tail emission. But I do feel that, first of all, either there is a tail emission or we move to some sort of model, different consensus model besides proof of work that is a lot cheaper to do, or something like Avalanche or things like that. But I really like tail emissions because I do think that many people lose their coin. It just needs to be something that replaces this as well. One of the worries also is that, if we reduce the PoW, that also means a reduced security on the blockchain, unless we see a huge spike in Zcoin's price post halving. We don't really know how halving would affect other coins besides Bitcoin, and even though now we're not really sure what would really happen. Bitcoin is just an assumption, and people saying that it would increase. I don't think it's necessarily the case. I don't know whether Kristy or Henry has any sort of insight as to why does it seem that like hash rate and like mining power and price seems to be very intertwined, and whether miners have a incentive to pump the price up to keep their operations running, and that seems to be more of a ASIC thing. But I'll be interested to hear if anyone has thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think we can go back to economic theory. And, for those who took economics, it says revenue is maximized when, cost is equal to revenue. So applied to mining, what it means is if you take your electricity, cost of electricity operations, and you divide that by the total amount of rewards, that determines the overall hash rate and how many miners coexist on the network. So as the total rewards go down by halving, the cost of electricity remains the same. So therefore, the theory is that, mining hash rate drops in half.
Yep. Yeah,
Now,
because
layer one, go ahead.
But then yet somehow Bitcoin has managed to kind of not see this, right? And is that the case because of ASICs, or is it the case of something else that's happening?
I believe it's greed.
It's because you believe it's greed. Okay.
So, everyone's trying to look at layer one as an example, right? They believe that, the halving is going to make the mining community very weak. So they're taking this opportunity to pump in, their energy developments along with their ASIC developments, putting in a 300 megawatt farm in Texas, or roughly that size, to basically deal with the apocalypse of Bitcoin mining.
Okay. Kristy, do you have any opinions on this? I mean, I noticed you're typing something.
I can talk a little bit on the Bitcoin side of things from an enterprise miner's perspective. Generally, during my time at Core Scientific, most of our customers actually ignore the Bitcoin halving, as in they're not really too worried about the price of Bitcoin. Because in their minds, they're doing one of two things. They're either deploying hardware to support the network because they have other investments that are symbiotic to the Bitcoin network and rely on that infrastructure. Or number two, they want a very small amount of, freshly mined coins for themselves. Price is pretty agnostic, and I like to call these people tribalistic miners because they actually stay locked into the coin even when it's not worth the opportunity to mine.
Like the Monero botnets, right? That you were talking about.
Monero has some very, very friendly operators who happen to own a lot of hardware that could be classified as a botnet. and they're also tribalistic. The Bitcoin has a large amount of tribalistic miners. So the best example that I always go and reference is Fidelity Investments. Their technology hub, God, I forget what it's called, but it's like their Center for Accelerated Technology or whatever. So they actually have dedicated mining operations, and why they're doing this, it's certainly not to make, you know, a large amount of money. Some of their hosting contracts are god awful. They're doing it to, number one, further their lines of business in research and help understand the market more to serve their customers. Number two, so that they can support the Bitcoin network, because they are quite Bitcoin crazy and they believe that it is a great alternative investment. And number three, because how can Fidelity in any way, shape, or form talk about Bitcoin if they themselves aren't involved in the ecosystem? You have Square Crypto, who strongly believes in Bitcoin being very helpful with the mining community and putting up some operations of their own. You have, we go into the Bitcoin Cash route, and we have Roger Ver. He has the largest mining operation for the Bitcoin Cash network because he is a tribalistic miner. He's not going to turn his hash rate off if the price dips below, you know, the cost to mine a coin. He's just going to keep it always steady and bleed cash because he's, you know, betting on the future of Bitcoin Cash. And then you have Bitcoin SV, you know, the most public example of what happens when miners aren't necessarily rational. They don't follow economic theory. So in BSV, and I think it was either Binance Research or maybe it was Hasu who did a wonderful report on this. BSV miners just are on the chain even though they're not making any money because they're, you know, holding right now and believe in the value of the coin. You also see this a lot in GPU mining altcoins. So, you know, miners will do speculation where they'll jump into a new coin and support that network, even though it doesn't make them immediate revenue. So a lot of the big enterprise players or the people that are smart aren't speculating or betting on price. And definitely the halving is going to push out a lot of the people that do just mine for a profit. Sorry, I'm just catching up on the comments.
Yeah, so like which altcoin networks? Okay, like I would say Monero definitely has a tribalistic miner. So what are the altcoins?
Ethereum.
You say? Ethereum.
Ethereum has a very tribalistic ecosystem. It's also got a very nomadic ecosystem, but it's pretty tribalistic. You also have Zcash that has quite a bit of a tribalistic network, not as big as the other ones.
Like Zcash, who is mining it? Aren't they just like the people?
There are three large Chinese farms, all with ASICs, of course, but that are just stay on the Zcash network. And when it was GPU based, there was a VC fund that was entirely dedicated to getting early Zcash. We can pivot over to Handshake and Cadena and some of the new coins that I can talk about. Right. So when a new coin is released, quite a few VCs actually rent out hash rate very early on to support the network. And they stay locked into the coin for about 6 months. They don't go out and purchase their own hash rate because they simply don't have the CapEx investment. It's far better to do a hash rate rental. Turns into an OpEx investment. It looks way better on the balance sheet.
Right.
And they usually do, contribute quite heavily to the coin, and they stay locked into the network. That's
similar to Grin, right? In a way.
Yes. Grin actually had quite a few very early VCs, layer one included, that were renting out hardware just to start mining it from day one and support that network. So Cadena has one. Vertcoin used to have one. Veriblock has one. Handshake is probably the biggest. So I'm very well versed in the Handshake ecosystem. One of the farms I consult for is definitely a tribalistic miner. They're locked into Handshake, even though Ethereum is about 40 to 50% more profitable right now. But they're number one, interested in participating in the ecosystem, and number two, they believe in the value of the coin 3 to 4 months from now, or even further than that.
And how about Nervos?
Nervos was sadly overrun by FPGAs very early. So one of the problems is if you don't space out or balance that change from hardware, some of your early tribalistic miners or your early CPU or GPU miners get hardened and they just leave the network and they don't look back. So Nervos had a bit stream available for it 2 days after its launch.
Ouch.
Even though they championed, that they were ASIC resistant. So it basically, most of the GPU miners just said, you know what, fuck it. FPGA mining right now is still, it's not as decentralized as the FPGA champions would represent it is. It's still very much a centralized process. There's not that many of them available at scale, and they have much tighter restrictions than ASIC hardware or GPU or CPU hardware. So you can't get an FPGA legally in places like Ukraine or in Venezuela or parts of Africa or parts of China as well.
Yeah. G Kumaran asks, isn't Handshake run by FPGA?
There's 2-bit streams right now that do not produce a profit because the cost of the FPGA outweighs the profit you bring. So right now it's all GPU based. I envision it's going to make a very quick transition to FPGA probably in the next 2 months. And then after that, there's definitely going to be ASICs built for it. One of the firms that I just signed as interim lead silicon architect is building a Handshake ASIC. So, but Handshake has said like from the get-go that they want ASICs. They're very supportive of ASICs. It's because they're building basically a TLD / they're building a replacement for the internet, and they want as many ASICs and as many of these enterprise providers as possible.
Do you happen to know, like, okay, like for example, like those that are mining privacy coins, especially like Grin, Beam, and like Monero, like who are these tribalistic miners? Are they just like privacy advocates or they're VCs? I mean, okay, it makes sense for Grin because they were like a newly launched coin, but
so on Monero's side, it's actually a lot of privacy advocates. Monero has managed to create an ecosystem where the miners are really aligned with the values of the coin. For Grin, it's kind of a mix. Grin managed to capture the spirit of the early days of Bitcoin, and so you have a lot of people that just love that cyberpunk, genre that have jumped in. VCs as well. There's 3 VCs crypto-based that support Grin. We have Veil, which has a very small GPU mining community, so it's actually quite decentralized. It's also a very early coin. It's about roughly, I think, 100 individual miners that are coalescing around Veil. Zcoin has a lot of tribalistic miners. You can often tell, your tribalistic miners because your hash rate is quite steady. It's normal to have some fluctuation and variation. You always will. Farms go off, they get reboots. Profit switching is a thing that will always exist. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
you're saying that Zcoin has a lot of tribalistic miners.
It does. It actually does. You guys do have tribalistic miners. It's the GPU miners that have shepherded you, and still mining Zcoin right now isn't a profitable option for large-scale farms because they would overwhelm the network and they would compete with themselves. You also don't have the market liquidity right now to support a lot of enterprise farms. So you're not going to see like a majority of that Ethereum hash rate switch over. Zcoin just can't support it right now.
How does Grin support that then? I mean, like,
Grin has a lot of liquidity because a lot of those VCs contribute to it. And it had an exchange on day one. So there's a new trend with coins where I'm not sure how it was for Zcoin, but I assume that you had to push really hard to get it listed on some exchanges. Or at least
last time it wasn't that difficult. It was like Bittrex, then Bittrex was a lot easier to list on, and it was good liquidity, but they weren't sending Binance. I think like Bittrex was like the big maybe Polo, but yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce your name, but I think it's rehrar, but you have a very good
Diego.
point.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Rehrar.
You are exactly correct. Economic theory doesn't work with mining. So the Hasu recently wrote a bit of an article on CoinDesk stating that miner centralization isn't an issue because miners will always act in their own self-interest. That's not true. Mining game theory is more akin to natural security game theory, which is users will sometimes just act very sporadically. There are some, there are some users that will do things even if it harms themselves just to watch the world burn. We see this all the time in mining. I saw it very early on in the early days. I saw it with the Bitcoin Hash and Bitcoin SV wars. I've seen it with some of the smaller coins as well. And I see it in the rental hash rate game. So yeah, mining game theory is more akin to natural human psychology than it is economic theory.
And this is why talking with Bitcoin maximalists is extremely difficult, because they always argue on the basis of, well, if we think about economic theory, then this is going to happen. Like, okay, dude.
I used to think like that, and then I got involved, in the mining game at scale, and then I realized I was a complete moron. It's people will do all sorts of things just to fuck over a competing chain if they really want to, and that is agnostic of the hardware choice. If there was a scenario where Bitmain came out with their own coin in before someone says Bitcoin Cash, and Silicon had their own coin, you could bet those two would be trying to fuck each other over, even if it meant that they were burning or losing tons of money.
It could be like Bitcoin Go, right? Like Bitcoin Go was like
Do you have a watermelon, Ruben?
Oh yeah. Just itchy hands. Yeah. So I mean, like Bitcoin Go was just some other rich guy who just wanted to say like, I have my own coin as well, right? And then that was, I don't know what the attacks
Yeah,
were anything.
Bitcoin Gold is a little complex. So it has become the de facto standard where people go, oh look, Bitcoin Gold is the reason why GPUs will always result in 51% attacks. There's been 51% attacks on poor Peercoin, and Peercoin uses SHA-256D, so that argument just dies there. Bitcoin Gold
I always felt that the 51% attacks happened, especially when new ASICs were coming into the market. Like I think when the first time Bitcoin Gold was being attacked, it was new Zcash, Equihash ASICs that were coming in, and even Horizon was attacked because they were also using the Equihash algorithm as well. I wondered whether it was, well, look, I have this ASIC that can always mine Zcash, but look, there's an opportunity to attack these smaller chains that I don't really give
let's
a crap
talk a little
about.
bit about why people 51% attack. It's not actually, so the game theory in Bitcoin goes that you can modify the chain, right? And then you can like censor transactions, etc. The people that are actually pulling off 51% attacks don't really care about that. They're doing it to go and fuck with the exchanges and make some money there.
Right.
It's the exchange problem. Sometimes you even organize this, and I've been witness to 3 instances where there's 2 competing coins that are sort of going after the same market. So say, for example, privacy shit coins, and they will attack each other, and they will try to get each other delisted from exchanges. And they do rent hash rate, but guess what? You can rent out ASIC hash rate, you can rent out FPGA hash rate, and you can rent out GPU or CPU hash rate. If someone has a good and they can sell it for more money than they can make just using the device, they'll probably sell it. Yes, Cold War fighting does happen. It started to even out a lot in the last 4 years, because what's happened is the mining industry, if we separate the economic part of cryptocurrency and the mining part of cryptocurrency, mining has started to mature quite a bit. And this has really been because, you've gotten the big players involved. You've got a lot of capital behind it. You've got people like AMD, NVIDIA, Consensus, all playing in this space in some manner, even if it's just by selling hardware. You've got the ASIC manufacturers. You have now we have a public ASIC manufacturer as well, Canaan. A lot of the the old scrappy stuff has started to phase out. It still happens in the altcoin arena, but not so much anymore in Bitcoin, Monero, Zcash, or top 30, I would say, coins. Raven should be top 30, maybe it's top 50. But Ravencoin is one of the coins that doesn't follow this rule, and that is because right now it's incredibly profitable. There's a subset of ASICs that have eFPGA IP, and Raven's algorithm is very profitable on this hardware.
Okay. All right. I think we have we've already way exceeded the meeting time. So I don't think we have reached consensus on this, but it just seems like everyone's okay with the way it currently goes. But please, I think these meetings are not meant to come to a consensus. It's a way to express opinions, to have people voice out their concerns, and we'll post this on the forums, and people can discuss and debate. And these are more of educated discussions, so that people can have a better understanding of the issues at stake, so they can come out to a more educated reason. So before we wrap up, I guess we've already gone for 1 hour 50 minutes. In the last 5-10 minutes, does anyone have any quick questions? There will be a development update, and there'll be the new roadmap that we'll be publishing soon. So a lot of those questions will be answered as well. But I'll be taking some questions. Does anyone have any questions whatsoever from the Zcoin team, especially stuff that you want to hear about?
While we're waiting for questions, I would recommend everyone visit the forums and comment on the topics there, as well as comment on the proposals on the crowdfunding system as well.
Yeah.
Don't forget to click like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and our Twitter.
Yes.
And maybe Facebook.
Need more Sandra videos. Yeah, I think Sandra's gone already. No, we're not on BitShoot. Probably should get we should get it on it if it's not too difficult to port. Yeah, AJ, maybe
All right,
we could
I'm gonna
get
go to
that
bed.
done.
It's late. Bye, guys. Have a
See
nice
you,
life.
Diego. Take care. Dual ego based PoWs. So the idea of the green, I think probably Henry knows about this, but basically the idea of green is to start with ASICs and GPUs with a more favoring GPUs, and slowly move towards 100% ASIC. And the idea is one algorithm is favoring ASICs, and one algorithm is favoring GPUs. I don't know how ASIC resistant their GPU algo is, but it was never meant to be long-term resistant. But yeah, that's the kind of idea behind it.
It's not it's ASIC resistant from the standpoint that they fork every 6 months. And then from a long-term perspective, it gets phased out over 2 years. So no one ever built an ASIC for such a short product life.
It's kind of like what Beam does as well, right? A hard fork every 6 months. Sinyon said, yep, they should respond to scam posts on Facebook, post more quickly. Definitely. Every time we post a new Facebook, that's one of these shitty giveaways. Okay, if no one has any questions, I'll be ending this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone who attended. And I don't know what the marching song for Zcoin is, but centralized meeting with, yes, I can end it anytime I want. Just not the watermelon. Okay, so yeah, but really, if anyone wants to talk about anything more, I'll be happy to continue. But we are hitting the 2-hour mark. All right,
Now
thank
you
you
know the
guys. Oh, yep.
12% goes-
What were we saying? Sorry, Henry.
I said the 12% goes to buying watermelons.
Yes, this is funded by Zcoin, definitely. This is actually a birthday present. I don't know why my sister gave it to me. She said it's good to like massage yourself. I just use it to whack my head. All right, thank you very much, guys. So this is the recording will be up, and please again visit the forums, visit the ZCS, and weigh in. And thank you so much, Henry and Kristy, DJM, and everyone else who took the time to come on. And well, Diego's no longer here. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.